get here? In the beginning, we all worked for the seller. So it was like everybody sitting up for the bench. Everybody worked for the seller unless a buyer signed something with somebody else. And they became a buyer's. But everybody else over here was still working for the seller. So if you are with Remax, which you are, and there's an agent with Coldwell Banker, and that agent with Coldwell Banker has a customer.
Sorry, hold up, they're not hearing you very well.
Okay.
I think you're going to need to be by your computer talking.
Okay. So if that customer with Coldwell Banker has a customer, not a client, and they did not sign anything with that agent, that client is still a subagent, or customer is still a subagent of Remax. Firms don't like that because once they accept someone in that type of subagency position, they're taking on responsibility for that agent, and they don't like that. So that's when you go in the MLS and it says subagent Europe. That means you're not getting paid, first of all, and it means you have no business in that transaction. So in the 90s, there was a big real estate firm called Edina. And Edina was not disclosing how they represented people because nobody was. And they had a woman who came in to buy a house, and she was represented by an Edina agent for a listing that was an Edina listing. So she buys the house and she goes in there, and the MLS said it was sprinkler, there's an irrigation system. So she goes around looking for the irrigation system and can't find it. She calls Edina. They send out the other agent. The other agent picks up the hose. Woman's name was Jamie. The other agent picks up the hose and says, I guess this is it. So she goes to the settlement agent, the closing attorney, and says, they didn't tell me. And he said, well, that's the way it is in real estate. So she goes and she talks to other people, and they all go to a lawyer, and they file a class action suit. And Edina had to pay in 1993, I think it was, $225 million. $225 million Edina had to pay in 1993, which was a lot of money then.
A lot of money now.
So other real estate firms kind of perked their ears up and said, we need to do something about this. And so did the Department of Justice. Department of Justice said, you need to do something about this. So the first thing they do is they say, we're going to disclose buyer agents. That's the first thing we started to disclose, whether we represented a buyer or not. And when that happened, it went on for a while. A few years later, we had to make it a little bit more complicated and add dual agency to it. We had to disclose dual agency. And after we got into that, we added designated agency as well. So what's the difference? We meet a client, we do working with real estate agents, which they chained on us again. We do working with real estate agents. Good morning. What we do is we show them the buyer side or the seller side, and then after we check the boxes. We check the boxes, not that. Real Estate Commission says we check the boxes indicating what kind of agency options we offer the client. And then when that's done, at that point in time, we should have some idea of how we're going to work with them. That's how it's supposed to work. I know it doesn't always work that way. I've been a broker at Charge for many years. I know how it works on the street. That's what's supposed to be done. And that thing is supposed to be signed before you show any property. Okay, because the real estate commission is thinking, if you've gotten so far along that you're going to show the property, you got to know something about it. Right? You got to know if they can afford something. You got to know maybe why they want to buy something. So that's the latest you can do that. Okay, I'm going to stand right here. All right. So stand right here. It'll be attached. This is what it looks like when we've got two clients from different firms. We've got the blue broker is representing the seller, and the red broker is representing the buyer. That's fine. We don't have any problem there. Nobody's got any confidential information about anybody else. How are they doing?
Let's make sure it's speaking into you.
Okay, I'll stay right here. It's hard for me to stay still, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. So broker A and broker B work for different companies. No problem there. None whatsoever. Okay. But when we've got two agents in the same firm, or who have a buyer and a seller, ask questions whenever you want. And if you have any questions out there in TV land, please put them in chat. Tiffany's checking the chat. So if I've got a buyer and a seller in the same firm, even though it's two different agents, we are in dual agency. Now, we talked about, have to think about it this way. Even though when we go out there into the wide world, we say, my client, my client, ain't your client. It's the firm's client, right? So the firm's the umbrella. If we've got agent A, if Susan's got a listing and Yvonne's got a buyer, they are in dual agency because it's the firm's business. It's not your business. So you're under the firm's umbrella. If we've got, like I said, a buyer and a seller in the same firm, we've got dual agency. It happens with one agent, with the buyer and the seller, or it could happen with two different agents in the firm. What's the difference? Okay, so if I've got Myrna, and Myrna's got the buyer and the seller, she is one person. She's got confidential information about both of those parties. She can't share any of that information. She cannot advocate, pointed fingers. She cannot advocate for the buyer and she cannot advocate for the seller. Now, I know you probably like one better than the other. I know that. I had an agent at another company. I don't even know how she got herself into this deal. She ran across a woman, I think at the bank, and the young woman said, I'm buying a condo from my mother-in-law. And she said, oh, let me help you. Now, mom-in-law and daughter-in-law had been widowed, had already worked out the material items of the transaction. So I don't know how she got herself in this deal. So she says so the daughter-in-law says, yeah, I don't trust my mother-in-law like sometimes mother-in-laws are. And so she signs her up. Then she calls the mother-in-law. Patsy, mother-in-law's name was Patsy. So she calls Patsy. Says, Patsy, I'm helping your daughter-in-law. Maybe I can help you too. She signs them both up, has them sign for dual agency. And I know because like once a week, I come into my office and say, you know what that woman did? You know what Patsy did? So I knew that she liked Patsy. She didn't like Patsy. She liked the daughter better. It got so bad that they went to the closing. She never gave the settlement statement to the mother-in-law. So mother-in-law shows up at closing doesn't know, I mean, they had the deal all worked out, that she's paying a commission. Yeah, ooh. Doesn't know she's paying a commission. So she calls me. I had to grovel. I'm a good groveler. So I had to grovel. We had to have lunch with Patsy a couple of times. I apologized profusely, but it was crazy. So I know that you're going to like one better than the other. We're human. We're going to. But you've got to walk that fine line. You cannot tell one party what to offer. You cannot tell one party what to take. You cannot tell them anything about each other unless you have permission to. So it's a very, very fine line, and it is an adversarial position for the client. Yes, Abraham.
How do you best answer when they ask you a question and you think you shouldn't answer it? How do you best answer the question so that they don't feel offended or that you help?
Oh, Abraham wants to know if they ask you a question that you can't answer and you don't want to offend the client, what should you do? Anybody else can chime in, please, but I personally would say to them, in order to protect the position of both you and the buyer or the seller, I cannot share that information. What does anybody else do when that happens? Help me. Same thing. Susan does the same thing. So basically, that's what I would do. The trick comes in when you've got two agents. This is where it gets kind of funky because you're in a big firm, right? And dual agency occurs across offices. So if you are here in Ballantyne and someone is in South Park, you're under the same legal entity. So you're still in dual agency and you may not even know it. Right? So you've got to be careful. And when you've got two agents, the same situation occurs. So if you've got agent A and agent B, those agents can share information. Yeah. Susan, look at me. Are you crazy?
I am looking at you like that. I didn't know we could do that.
You could do that because you're the firm.
Okay.
All right. It's the same as having one agent. You're the firm. You can share information with each other in dual agency, but you can't share the information with the client. So even though we've got two people, two different offices, my client, right? You can share information because you are the firm. You can't help your client. You can't tell the client what to offer, even though there are two different ones of you. You cannot tell the seller what to take. You really can't even negotiate repairs. You can give suggestions. You act the same way as you would if it was one broker with the buyer and the seller. You're actually one.
Laurie, did you say that you could make suggestions?
You can make
Have
suggestions.
Something in the chat that says you can let the client know the local market trends and they're welcome to offer, counter offer the other based on that trend.
Right. So you are absolutely correct. Whoever has that chat, you're absolutely correct. You can make suggestions. You can give them raw data. You can say, you can run a report. This is what's sold in the neighborhood. This is what it's sold for. What do you want to offer? And you can do the same thing with the seller. You can say, this is what's sold. But you can't interpret it. Once you start interpreting, it is the same as advice. So you can't do that. Are you surprised?
Yes. Am I the only one that's surprised?
Susan's surprised.
I'm surprised on, are you just saying in this situation, or are you saying that when you go to list a home and you're going through, I mean, it just comes right out of my mouth, based on this information, right? either I'll say I would suggest a price of blah, 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 or say, based on this, what do you feel we should list your home for? What is the correct answer?
Okay, so Susan, I don't know if you could hear her. Susan wants to know, if you go to list a house, what can you do? You're not in a dual agency situation when you go to list a house,
So it's only in.
right? Because
dual agency.
before you get into dual agency, so we're walking around, you're working with a buyer and there's another agent working with a seller, and you're representing your buyer like you would represent any other buyer. The agent working with the seller is representing the seller just the same as they would represent any other seller, until that seller or that buyer becomes interested in one of the firm's listings. That's when you enter into dual agency. So you have to realize, if you've got a seller that didn't agree to dual agency, nobody in the firm can show their property, right? Which is a loss to the seller, because not only do you have a lot of agents, but you're a good firm. So no one else can show the property to that seller. Surprise, surprise.
Corey, I have a question come up. I had a seller that we're not quite there yet, but they said they understand dual agency. They're okay with someone else in the firm showing their property, but they don't want me to act as a dual agent.
Okay. That's a whole different ballgame.
Okay.
Okay. We'll get to that into a minute.
If I had the house open, say open house, and a buyer came in, they said they didn't have an agent. I guess I reach out to Hottie and ask him to point out a designated agent. Okay.
Exactly. So the question is, if you've got a buyer or a seller who has agreed to dual agency, except they don't want you to be a dual agent, then you've got to have, you can still stay in dual agency with another agent in the firm. It's the same as, but we'll get a little further into that when we talk about. So in any form of dual agency, whether it's a single agent, you're just walking that fine line. You got to keep your mouth shut as to motivation, price, any advice to the client. And it says that right in the listing agreement and the buyer agency agreement. It says when the firm is acting as a dual agent, we cannot do blah, 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 blah. It's paragraph 17. It says you cannot do blah, 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 blah. Your agent cannot. And if you want any advice, it says it right in the listing agreement. If you want any advice, contact your attorney. It says it right in the listing agreement, and it says it in the buyer agency agreement. So, and no undisclosed dual agents. You've got a buyer calls you. Buyer says, I'm looking for a piece of property and I want to build a car repair shop. And then you are an enthusiastic agent. So you go through the tax records and you find vacant lots and check the zoning, and you start calling all these people. And you say, you want to sell your lot. And you don't tell them you have a buyer. If you find someone who says, yeah, you don't tell them you have a buyer. And then you list their property. Okay. And then you show your buyer who you have over here, their property. You've got undisclosed delays. Real life situation.
I think that happens a lot.
I think so too. Yes, we think that happens a lot in this room. That's the opinion. An agent got a call on her list. This is agent got a call on the list. Agent says, okay, I'll show you the listing. Come on over this afternoon. The listing agent meets the customer, because she's not a client yet. And the listing agent does working with real estate agents. The listing agent does everything she's supposed to do. And then the buyer says, I want to make an offer. Listing agent, good listing agent says, I've got 3 offers coming in this afternoon. I don't want to write your offer for. I'm going to get you in touch with another agent in the firm. Nobody has signed anything yet. You call the other agent says, well, I'm out of town. I will write the offer. Nobody said anything yet. All we got is working with real estate agents from the listing agent. Other agent writes the offer for, I believe the sale price was $249. Writes the offer for $269 with $20,000 earnest money. The woman was a young woman and she's hanging out at the pub on Friday night and meets an attorney friend of hers, and he says, "Ooh, I bought a house." The attorney friend says, "Well, we do closing. Send me the contract." So she sends the contract to the attorney friend and says, "Who wrote this?" This was before we had people lining up. Okay. "Who wrote this for you?" "Well, show me the paperwork." No paperwork. So, when you're a broker in charge, and Tiffany would probably agree with this, you sometimes don't know what's going on until someone comes into your office in a panic. You sometimes just don't know. She says, "Somebody's trying to steal my buyer." The attorney had obviously called a friend of his. That friend of his called the client and said, "Listen, if you sign up with me, I'll give you a rebate on the commission." She says, "Somebody's trying to steal my client." I said, "Where are all your agency agreements?" "Well, I was going to do though." So this goes all the way down the road. And this one agent who screwed up so badly is insisting that they get a commission. She finally wants to go to arbitration where she loses. The other broker then comes back and takes me and the agent to the real estate commission for undisclosed agents. The only thing that saved me was company policy. Taking out the policy manual, showing the commission what the manual said, and also having records in SkySlope. So you got to be careful. Sometimes, like I said, you might not know you're a dual agency because it's a big firm. So it happens in 2 ways. Okay, so we said this, agents can share information with each other, but not with the clients. Is all this in your way? Let me get that out of the way. You cannot advocate for the clients, you just facilitate information. No information about price terms. Can you have oral dual agency? Yes. When you do oral buyer agency, doesn't happen magic. It's not a magic thing. Just because somebody didn't sign something doesn't mean that you're an oral buyer agent. I know we think that because I teach the class all the time. We're not an oral buyer agent. You actually have to say in some form or in writing to the buyer, we are in an oral agreement. The agreement, it could be an email, it could be anything, but you have to form that relationship. It's not like, oh, I don't want to do buyer agency agreement. This person scares me. And so it doesn't happen automatically. You have to actually say in one form or another, and I would follow it up with an email, listen, if you don't want to sign something with me right now, you can sign something for one house, you can sign something for a week. And if they're still saying, I hate all realtors, I worked with a realtor once and all they did was try to cheat me and make me pay a higher price so they get more money. And you can say, well, we can work under an oral agreement. And under this oral agreement, you can work with anybody you want. You can, remember Rick Montgomery? Rick is agent. he got a client from relocation once, and he was showing them around South Charlotte. And he said to the client, you know, let's go have lunch and I'll show you a couple more this afternoon. The client said, well, I'm meeting with my Lake Norman agent this afternoon. And Rick pulled up in a gas station and put him out. And said, well, come and have your Lake Norman agent pick you up.
Wow.
So you have to actually say, we're in a dual agency agreement. You can work with, we're an oral buyer agency agreement. You can work with whoever you would like to. I'm not holding you to a specific time frame. This is open-ended. We can cancel this orally. And is it okay if I act as a dual agent? So you can have oral dual agents. And then follow it up with an email. Because it has to be a formal agreement. Just because they wouldn't sign doesn't mean you're an oral, because these things are not a problem till they're a problem. And the commission's going to come and they're going to ask you for everything. Ask you for your correspondence. It's ugly. So you can have oral dual agents. If you have oral dual agency with a buyer and the seller has not agreed to dual agency, you can call the seller and get an oral agreement from the seller, but it has to be in writing before you write an offer. If you have written dual agency with the buyer, then the seller's permission has to be written as well. So it depends on where the buyer is as to what the seller's, what word am I trying to find? Permission is. If so it's written with the buyer, it's got to be written with the seller. Okay, no self-dealing, no disclosing information. Yes.
But what if I have a buyer that signed a dual agency? I go under contract with a colleague. Do I have to specifically ask my colleague, did your seller sign a dual agency, or did I need to my part because my buyer signed for dual agency? The buyer agency agreement, is it on the listing agent to come back and say?
Tiffany, is it in the MLS if they've agreed to dual agency, or if not, do you have anything? It's not. So do you have any way
Offer.
in,
I want to get in trouble if Irma didn't.
I think it's where you're representing there, but I think it is up to each agent to confirm that if you're in a dual agent or designated dual agent, that you're communicating with your potential, your client, that, hey, we're going into this, do you agree to it? I would have it in writing.
right. So it would be up to each individual agent to, and when they write the offer, they tell you, so you know.
Can I
you're
chime
gonna-
in?
Sure.
I apologize. I think if it's not listed in MLS as a firm exclusive, right there assumes that it's acceptable for it to be with other firms.
No.
Exclusive is something
Firm exclusive is something completely different, Jonathan.
You need to communicate with each other if it's a colleague in your firm, and then when you write the offer, you'll know what to check on your information page, which is what, page 16 or 17 now as of April, as of July, as to what you're going to check. Dual, designated, or represented under your name, under your firm, who you're going to represent. There's a box to check.
So that is on the actual OTP. So
Right.
for it to have that, and agents should be marking it appropriately. So if you're in the same firm, you should be having that conversation prior to submitting the offer as to, is your client okay with designated relationship?
Right, or a dual relation.
Yes, because in South Carolina, there's an extra form that
Right.
you also have to attach. Dual agencies.
Yes. So yeah, the answer is yes, you're going to have, well, we know, the first thing we know is that if you've got an offer coming from within the firm, you're going to be in one of those positions. And picking up the phone or calling them or saying, are we designated or are we dual would be appropriate.
Laurie, can you repeat what the question was? They didn't hear it online.
Okay.
And they also said that you were required to put it into, or you should put it into the agent remarks about dual agency. If they're not allowing dual agency up front, there should be some remarks in the MLS, and I have seen that from time to time.
That's a good idea. Remarks in the MLS would be good. And the question was, if you've got an offer from someone in your firm, do I have to talk to that broker and verify whether we're dual or designated? And as I guess the opinion of the group is yes.
I would think also the second someone shows your property within the firm and you realize it's a Remax agent showing, you should call and say, hey, we're not doing my seller's not dual agent. I mean,
Right.
that would help things too.
But how often do we call each other? Work with you, blah, blah, blah. You don't say.
Right. Well, the conversation that's going on in the room is that when someone from the firm is showing one of your properties, it might be a good idea to say, you know, thanks for showing my property. Do you have permission for dual or designated agency?
Even best practices, if your client as a listing agent is not allowing dual agency, that should be noted up front so that anyone in the firm knows that prior to wasting their time and showing your property.
Absolutely.
So the other recommendation is that if your client is not allowing dual agency, it should be listed up front so you don't waste your time showing their property. I'd give them a call and say, hey. Okay.
I'm just gonna be honest, never thought about it. Good to know.
Yeah. Most agents don't. You think about that more when you're a BIC and you see all those things coming in front of you and saying, what's going on here? And that notice page, people don't fill out that notice page. You still have a problem with the notice page? If you read the contract says, this is where I'm going to give you notice. It says, I'm going to give you notice at these places. So legally, if you notify them in any other manner than what's on that. The notice page. So they could go to court and say they never notified me. You say, oh yeah, I did. I called you. Does it say here you should call me? It says here you should text me or email me. The notice page is important. So designated agency does not happen automatically. Just because two agents in the firm are working with the buyer and the seller does not mean that the BIC has waved their magic wand and you've become designated agents. The BIC actually has to appoint the designated agents. I don't know if you have a policy in this firm as to how that happens. Do you, Tiffany?
Say that one more time, I'm trying to answer the question.
Do you have a firm policy as to going to the, I'm saying that they have to go to the BIC to be designated?
No, we do not have a policy for designated unless someone is looking for someone to designate.
Okay. So if you've got clients and they've agreed to designated agents, then you should have a conversation again with the other agent and say, are we dual or are we going into designated? I like designated. It's the better option. But let's say people are hanging out in the break room and one agent's working with a buyer completely as a buyer's agent. One agent's working with a seller completely as a seller's agent. And you know how people talk? You know how people talk? Oh, I got this terrible seller. He's got his house overpriced. I know I could get him down 10,000 if he would just listen. And then that other agent has a buyer who's interested. Now you got confidential information. And technically, once you have that, you can't be the designated agent. You either have to remain in dual agency or the broker in charge has to appoint someone who has no confidential information. So if you remember the sales meetings where everybody used to stand up and say, this is my new listing. I got it. It's beautiful. This is my new listing. It's beautiful. It's a terrible seller. It's a terrible seller. He's got it overpriced. So the broker has to like look out far and wide. You got to remember, there are like 1,200 firms in Charlotte, and the majority of them are 5 brokers or less. So the rules have to apply there. And so everybody's talking. Team meetings. You go to team meetings and you discuss what's going on with your clients, with the team. You can't be designated with anyone else in your team if that's going on. Right? You've got to stay in a dual agency situation or get someone outside the team. Because, you know, the team leaders want everything to close, want to wake up all their money, and they're going to say, hey, Joe, what's going on with your seller? It's been on the market for 2 months now. What are we going to do? And Joe's going to say, okay, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get and reduce the price $15,000. Everybody knows.
He's got a little bit.
Okay. So you can't have confidential information in a dual agency, a designated agency situation. But the good thing, and a BIC cannot be a designated agent with a provisional broker unless the BIC is from another office. So if we've got a provisional broker here, they cannot be a designated agent with the BIC here, but they could be a designated agent with the BIC at South Park, because the BIC at South Park doesn't have the files.
But if they have Sky Slope shared. Doesn't that?
So Yvonne, say if you have Sky Slope's share, go ahead, Tiffany.
So broker in charges do not have access to other offices' information. Everything is segmented into offices.
Okay.
So I can technically see everything. But if I was a broker just for Valentine BIC and South Park had a different BIC, we can't see each other's information.
On Skyslope.
In Skyslope.
Okay.
So Tiffany was saying that brokers from different offices cannot see information from other offices in Skyslope.
Sorry to ask some questions, but back to the designated agent. So if both agree, hey, Marna, we designated dual, she says designated. Can we just check? Is it check designated, or do we need to go to the BIC to get something in writing giving permission, or are we just allowed to say to each other, okay, we're designated?
That's company policy.
So we do not have a company policy at the time that says you have to get your BIC's permission for designation. Now, if you're not sure who would be a good designated other side, you can come to your BIC and say, how can we work out a designated relationship here? I'm currently with B Tool and I don't want to be just, well, I want to be designated dual.
So you
But
can
for
be.
now, we can agree amongst ourselves.
Yes, amongst yourselves, you can say, if you guys were doing a transaction together, you can confirm that you're designated. You don't know any confidential information about each other's parties in the transaction. And so you can act as designated within the firm. And it can be designated dual, which is a different relationship than just plain dual. Lori will continue.
Yes. Designated agency is a form of dual agency. But let me just back up a minute to let those who may not have heard that Tiffany said, as far as the firm goes, there is not a formal policy as to designating agents. So basically, you're going to be on an honor system, and you're just going to talk to each other and say, are we dual or designated? And if we do determine that we're designated, just going to confirm that nobody knows anything about the other party. And I think you would know if that other person had confidential information, like if you're living with them or something. You would know. And let me go back to the question. I forgot what the question was. Okay. So the BIC technically is the one who designates the agents. It's a form of dual agency. We call it designated, but technically it's called designated dual agents. It's only in-house. If someone doing business with someone within the firm, you're going to be in one of those positions. Permission is required, can have confidential information. Special circumstances, we were talking about this. If you've got a team leader who's a BIC of their team, and then you've got a BIC in the office, there's no rule about it, but I'd be careful, because if you've got two BICs in the office, they are both equally responsible for the agents. So if the team leader is a BIC, you have to assume that the team leader knows everything about the agents in their team. And then, of course, the BIC, in order to be in their supervisory position, would need to help the team. So that's something I'd be careful about. We talked about team leaders to team members. So if you're having a team that's got meetings like every week, everybody's talking about everybody else's clients, you're going to have to go outside the team to get a designated agent. You could be dual agents, because in dual agency, everybody can know everything. But in order to be designated, you might have to go outside that team. And team members to other agents of the firm. That's pretty simple. Questions, because now I'm going to go into material fact for a little bit.
So one of the questions we have from online is, if two offices are involved in designated agents, you should both appoint designated agents. And I think we've addressed that.
Yeah, so the question we have is if agents from different offices are in designated agency, should the BICs appoint the designated agents? And as we said a few minutes ago, that there's no formal policy in the firm, so that if you find that you're working with someone in the firm, you really need to talk to the other party and say, are we in dual agency or were we in designated agency? And if you decide you're in designated agency, that's fine. You don't have to go to the BIC, but you should. You should just be confident that neither of you have confidential information about the other party.
Page 15 in notification only has buyer's agent, seller's agent, or dual agent.
Right.
If I was going to check dual agent, sounds like there should be another box where designated dual agent.
I'm going to write that down, because my friend is the chair of the forms committee.
Would that be better?
Yeah.
That designated dual agent?
It could be make it better. So we are having a Canopy Forms, North Carolina Forms meeting tomorrow, and Jennifer Frontera, Melanie Coyne, and I believe Will Martin, NC Realtors and Forms Committee members are going to talk about the forms. So that would be a good question or suggestion for tomorrow as well. Another question that has popped up is, if you're on a team, what happens when you're having a team meeting and you're talking only about material facts regarding the property? Can you still have designated relationships within the team, is the question.
Okay, so a question in the chat is, if you're in a team and you're talking about material facts about the property, can you still have designated agency? And the answer to that is yes, because we have to disclose we have to disclose material facts to everyone. Okay. Anything else?
So if I have a property listed and a buyer comes to me, it's unrepresented and wants me to go into dual agency, and my seller is fine with that, but yet maybe there's a language barrier between myself and the buyer per se, and I'm more comfortable with another agent handling that, so I asked Mert to handle that. So we decide on a designated dual agency, but yet maybe that buyer has already given me proof of funds or something like that. Do I know too much about that buyer to go into dual designated?
Yvonne's trying to confuse me, but I'm going to do the best.
Sorry.
I'm going to do my best. Yvonne's got a seller and a buyer calls her, and the buyer speaks another language. And the buyer decides that they want Yvonne to represent them. Now, remember, you don't have to. If you've got a buyer that comes to you, you don't have to sign up. They can remain an unrepresented buyer, right? Or you could refer them to another agent in the office and get a referral fee, rather than getting into all this dual agency. So that's another option. You don't have to stop. You can say, listen, I've got trouble communicating. I know a broker that could represent you. Now, the fact that you know about you've already gone to the lender and you've had them qualified, you couldn't be designated agents, but you could be dual agents. You could be dual.
But if you convince them to be an unrepresented buyer, that might come to bite you.
Yeah.
So the other comment is, if you convince them to be an unrepresented buyer, that could come back to bite you. You're absolutely correct. So what I would say is, listen, I'm having a trouble with the language. Perhaps you have a couple of options here. You can represent yourself in this transaction, which I would not recommend. Or I can refer you to another agent, or get another agent to work with you. And then it's up to you to decide how you're going to do that. You're going to be, but you'd have to stay a dual agency if you know about their purchasing ability. Sure, yeah.
Question came in, is complied agency, are they valid in North Carolina? They had a situation where the seller did not want representation, but agreed to pay a fee if agent brings a buyer. Can agents get in trouble for implied agency in that scenario?
So let me make sure I understand this correctly. You had a seller
That did not want to be
that
represented,
did not want to be represented.
but agreed to pay a fee if an agent brings a buyer. That sounds like a FISBO to me.
That is a FISBO. So it's only a problem when it becomes a problem. So typically, implied agency is not illegal, and you could act that way. But to cover your butt, I would do the unrepresented seller agreement, which just says, you're not representing me, but I'm going to pay you.
Okay. And what if the agent delivers the property disclosure form to the seller and says, this is a form you must sign or provide? Is that a problem? Repeat the question.
So what I'm understanding you're saying is that the agent who's representing the buyer brings the property disclosure to the seller.
Yes.
No, they can't get in trouble for that, because the Residential Property and Owners Association disclosure has to be filled out in most real estate transactions. There are some exemptions. So either the attorney's going to give it to them or you're going to give it to them. So this is what the new proposed disclosure looks like. And so it explains very definitely to the owner what they have to do. Remember, we don't fill it out. The owner fills it out. It gives them all the instructions. It tells them that they should not leave any question unanswered. It tells them to check yes or no representations. Also tells them that if they are aware of material fact, they do not have to disclose it. Sellers do not have to disclose material fact. But we do.
Okay,
Okay, Susan, surprised.
I'm not surprised, because that was the answer I got from the commission when I called on something that was relating to the seller. It's like, no, or no. And so it wasn't until we had an inspection that there were things that were so blatant, and that seller had to have known, and he didn't have to. And I called the commission. I said, doesn't he have to do that? And they said, no. I said, but now that everybody knows, doesn't that agent has to? And she said, yes, now the agent has to. I said, how does he do that? On the disclosure, the MLS, like, how does that happen? And that agent never disclosed. I mean, I'm not a rat or outer. So
Oh, come on.
I didn't go any further than that, but like they're not an agent, you know, like, so how is this handled? If they don't want to disclose, but that, does he put in the agent remarks on MLS? Like,
So Susan had a situation where she was the buyer's agent,
yes.
and there were some blatant material facts that showed up on the disclosure, and the seller did not disclose.
Yeah.
The seller does not have to disclose, the agent does. But Susan says, but that listing agent never disclosed. So how are we supposed to do that? So we don't have to tell the world. We don't have to put it in the MLS to the whole world and say the house has fallen down. But if someone shows the property and someone seems interested in the property, you have to disclose to them before they write an offer. So the thinking there is that if you're going to disclose the entire world, you might be harming your seller from anybody who wants to see it. And if the price reflects the condition of the home, maybe someone who would look at it might be interested. So we don't want to discourage everyone, but we want to make sure that anyone who has any interest knows.
So the seller no, about true facts, and they still check no on the property disclosure, not no representation.
They cannot check no. They have to check no representation.
What if they check no?
Then that's fraud or misrepresentation. They can get sued. So the question was, if the seller knows and they check no, can they do that? No, they cannot. If they have knowledge, they either have to check yes or no representation.
I had a situation with several, so lied.
We have a seller that lied.
And I hired an attorney involved, cost them money, and the seller said, the attorney said, I'm taking it for my bid. So they just, instead of spending more money on the attorney, they just agreed to buy the house and do the stuff themselves. But they said, please are you doing?
Right. So the comment is that there was a seller that lied, but the buyer, when they saw, decided not to go to court. It's sometimes not worth it.
But you still go to court after you close.
Yes, you can still go to.
And they're thinking about that. They're thinking about suing the seller and the listing agent. So listing agent lied on it too. So it closed and they might go after that. It's still gathering something.
So we're talking about people that lie on a disclosure and bringing up the point that you can still go to court after it's been settled, after the closing. Then it tells the buyer what they should do and their instructions. And it tells them about if they don't get they do not get the disclosures within 3 days. After a contract is formed, they can cancel the contract and get all their money back.
All the way back.
All their money.
All the money back.
And then they break it down into sections. Structural section. An HVAC and electrical section. I kind of like it.
Yeah. Breaks. Yeah.
I only took the time to really examine it the other day, but
Did they add the water bill here?
they've simplified some of the language. Baseboard dwellings. Fuel source, water supply. What?
Speak loud and your computer.
Okay. Let's see, we're looking to see if the water heater's in here. C4, the fuel source for your water heater. But when you see Jennifer tomorrow, if you go. Oh, no, the Real Estate Commission does disclosures, not NCR.
So they're having hearings, so we can ask that question at a hearing.
Right. Then we go into fixtures and appliances. and zoning. In zoning. Environmental issues.
All right, let's go back down. That was gonna be one of my questions. So does it say right there about pets? Like where we now have to disclose if there's been pets in the house, the property,
Let me look at miscellaneous. Liens. Government documents.
When this go into effect, you think? When will this go into effect?
I don't think there's a date yet.
I don't think so either. Still
Put it out for,
put it out for
everyone to provide feedback.
out for comments. So if you have any comments,
So this isn't in effect like the one for SBL or did July 1st.
that's structural. Must be here somewhere.
okay, because I think Bill Gallagher, when we did the update or whatever, it said now we're gonna have to disclose if we had pets or not for allergies.
Right.
Somebody asked me forever, like always, and he said, yeah. So like
Especially.
Yeah.
Why don't you go on?
Yes, we're going to move on. Yes, we are going to move on. So that's what it looks like. We're going to go over a few material facts. I'm going to be finished.
And I have some other questions regarding forms,
Okay.
but I think this is a question that's probably better asked tomorrow at the forums.
Okay.
It's relative to a new section of offer to purchase HNGH that talks about government compliance.
Oh, yeah.
And so that is a question that came up. Jackie Reynolds from our Waynesville office was asking about it.
We had,
She was concerned that if you have a house that was built in 1968, that it says you have to have be conveyed free of any material violation of law, ordinance, permit, or government regulation. She's concerned that the way that's worded, that it means that a 1968 house had to be up to code.
and and just to comment on that, we had
Can you tell her what I just asked?
okay.
Tell the Zoom what I asked.
Okay, so the question was about on the offer to purchase and contract. Paragraph 8H talks about governmental compliance, and it's very confusing and not clear. It sounds like that if the property at any point in time did not comply, it has to be disclosed. So we had an executive committee meeting at the state on Monday, and several people brought that up. So Jennifer Frontera and Patrice Willits, who are co-chairs of the Forms Committee, said that that was the one thing that has been brought up all over the state, and they're going to revisit that paragraph.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
eventually happens that you have to, because like the one house I have over on there is 1963. And, you know, you have your handyman fix your stuff for years, and then all of a sudden your handyman is retired, and so you have to call in, you know, like your plumbing, and you're like, well, we can't touch it until we get it up to code. And then you have no choice but to bring it up to code for them to put a new hot water heater in.
Right.
So eventually, you know, it will get up to code, but I mean, I wouldn't want to bring that whole house up to code.
Okay, so Lawrence got to share.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see it.
Can you see it? This is really quick about material facts. Material facts come in 4 flavors. Facts about the property itself. Facts that relate to the property. Material facts about the party's ability to complete the transaction. There are some very hopeful buyer's agents in this world. There's some very hopeful buyer's agents in this world, and they will take that buyer to 100 lenders trying to get that loan to work. But, you know, there's got to be a point where you got to disclose that they can't get the loan. And the same with the seller. We get into real estate usually because we like people. We want to make money, but we want to help people. So when they're going into foreclosure or bankruptcy, we've got our fingers crossed. Oh, please let them come up with the money to pay. We have to tell. At some point, we have to tell. It's not fair not to. This is the one that catches people. Anything of special importance to a person. If you're working with a client, the client says, I need to put up a fence. It becomes a material fact, whether they can or cannot put up a fence. They say, I need a property where you can have a detached garage. It's a material fact. They don't want to live next to, we had the Pete come in from the real estate commission once. He said he had a question once about there was a lion next door. A lion. And, and a listing agent called him and asked if they had to disclose that the seller had a lion. So if somebody doesn't want to live next to a lion, you would have to disclose that a lion lives there. The answer to the question that Pete said was lions are really not a material factor or protected class, but maybe the noise is. Okay, this is just there are some things that always have to be disclosed. Always, 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 even if they've been repaired. And the one thing is polybutylene pipes. You don't have to disclose polybutylene pipes if they've never leaked. Just the fact that they're there is not a material fact. But if they have leaked, ever, even if they've been repaired, you have to disclose. Highway access. If there's a subdivision that has direct access to a highway, it's a material fact, always.
When you say direct access, does that mean backs up to the highway?
Backs up to the highway.
Anybody that lives in the neighborhood?
Right. Right. Anyone who lives in the neighborhood, if anywhere in the neighborhood, you get out on the highway. Have to have access to the highway. Right. You have to have access. Flood insurance is always a material fact. Synthetic stucco, even if they tore the whole front off and they spent $1 million and they repaired it with different siding, if there's ever been synthetic stucco on a property, it's a material fact.
So even if they're taking it,
Even if they're
hard stucco on or totally taken off, put brick on, it still have to disclose it this one time on the property.
right. So Yvonne's comment was even if they've taken it totally off, put on hard coat stucco, completely new exterior, do they still have to disclose it? And yes. There was an agent in one of my offices once who got in big trouble because they disclosed synthetic stucco and it wasn't.
Good.
So they priced the house.
So half the later office is disclosed that there's synthetic stucco. Sometimes.
Probably it's country.
Probably the country club too. This one always surprises me, structural issues. Even if structural issues have been repaired, as simple as a roof leak. Have to disclose it. Right. The roof leaked in 1940. I don't know. Change in loan product is a material fact.
Can we go back to the structural piece?
Mm-hmm.
On the structural piece, it says or modifications.
Yes.
And recently, the real estate commission talked about if you remediated your crawl space. Can you speak to that?
Okay, so say that again.
Let's say in your crawl space, when you purchased the house, they said there was fungi growing in there.
Right.
And so you cleaned it and you redone it. Is that a material fact?
I'm really not sure. I'll have to ask that question.
So the real estate commission has gotten very picky in
Right.
their opinion on this, saying that
It is.
you're not monitoring it to make sure it hasn't come back. You need to disclose that.
Okay. So that's interesting. So Tiffany just brought up that the real estate, if you've had fungus or fungi in your crawl space and you've remediated it, if you have not kept tabs on it, you need to disclose it as a material fact. They are getting picky.
Yes. And think about unpermitted work.
Yes.
And asking that question. The real estate commission also said that any listing agent should be looking closely at a property. If there's something that visually you could have identified or smelled, you should be noting it, even if the seller does not.
Right.
So if you see a crack in the brick, you should be reporting it. If you open the crawl space and you see fungi on the floor joist or anywhere in there, you should be reporting it. If you see water, it's not.
And at least ask the question. Got to ask the question. If they say they've repaired it, you're going to ask for receipts because, as Tiffany said, they're getting really, really picky.
It's better to disclose than not to, because you're going to look better.
Yes, Abraham.
If they have, let's say, a leak, if they fix it themselves, without a permit, how would that, affect the
If they had a pipe leaking in the attic and they fixed it themselves without a plumber, they can do that. A homeowner can fix things on their own. And I would disclose this pipe was leaking 5 years ago, but it's been repaired. I would just say it happened. Like if you've had a fire in the house and part of the kitchen got burned out, you could say there's a fire in the house.
Hey, Lori.
Yeah.
Lori, this is Amanda Clark.
Hey, Amanda, how are you?
I'm doing
I
great.
can hear you. Yeah.
Thanks for your time and information. I put in the agent. I put in the.
Can't hear you right
comments
now.
I put in the comments just a couple minutes ago. I'm actively working with some buyer clients looking in the Union County corridor, and there was a house that came on the market. That agent in the descriptive text mentioned that 5 of the bathrooms had been recently renovated and updated. And in the permits, there was nothing on the disclosure or agent remarks, but I went into the permit department and found a permit was issued to restore the power. And I had our insurance agent, our executive insurance, do a clue report. And they disclosed in 2020, there was a $550,000 insurance claim that was paid.
With a fire.
Was a fire? Liar,
Yes,
liar, pants on fire.
Yeah, and the insurance company paid out $550,000.
Wow. That should have been disclosed. Yes.
I
I'm glad
definitely
you
will.
found out.
Another question that came up is, if the seller marks no representation, should we be asking the seller questions? And if we learn something, then disclose it. I would say if the seller tells you something, you must disclose it, but you also should do your own due diligence of walking around the home and examining everything yourself with your own eyes.
All right. So the question is, if the seller marks no representation, tell me the rest of that question, Tiffany.
And should you be asking the seller the questions? And if they say yes to you, you disclose that. of course.
Right. So if they mark no rep, you're going to work with a seller and you go on the listing appointment, your job is not only to get the listing, your job is to investigate the property. So if you see like the brick outside is one color and then the brick on the other side is another color, you can maybe assume there's been an addition. If you see structural cracks and then the seller checks no rep on those things that you think might be a problem, I would ask the question. And if they said yes, then I have to disclose it. If they say it's been repaired, I'm going to ask them for proof. But if they don't tell me, I'm not going to say, I might say, I noticed some water down here. I think we should do some further investigation. I'm not going to say, oh, look, the basement's flooding, because I don't know. I'm only going to talk to people about what I know is fact. And I hope that answers your question.
And the next question is, if you renovate a master bath but you don't change the structure, is it a material fact?
If I'm renovating a master bath, if I am redoing plumbing, if I am redoing electrical, if I'm taking out the bathtub and putting in new toilets and sinks, yes, that would be something that I would disclose. If I'm just painting and replacing the carpet, it might be a selling point, but it wouldn't be material.
The other question is, if you are disclosing something that is a material fact that your seller did not disclose, how do you share that with another agent? Should it be an agent remarks, or do you share it as you see people showing the house? What's the best way to do that?
The question is, how do you share material facts? Should it be in agent remarks? You could put it in agent remarks. You don't have to. The law says that material fact needs to be disclosed to any interested parties before they write an offer. So if you got an interested party or someone's been looking at the house and you see a second showing, I'd pick up the phone and call them and say, before you go back for the second time, I want you to know this.
Had situations where a house has been completely renovated. It's a beautiful new kitchen, blah, blah, blah. And I look back and the listing agent was the buyer's agent. Now the listing agent, but they didn't ask to disclose anything about permits. They came back for the listing appointment, so the client called and said, look at everything I did.
So
the listing agent doesn't say, did you call permits?
Well, they should.
Right.
So we're talking about permits. So the buyer's agent came back as the listing agent?
Was the buyer's agent when they purchased the house.
Okay.
5 years later, listing it, and it's been remodeled. They took out, they opened up the walls. You go into some neighborhoods, some 60s, and they put up new bathrooms, a kitchen. And they didn't say, wow, look at the great work you did. Did you pull permits? And they don't disclose that they did it or look into it. They just covered their eyes and ears and didn't say anything.
So we have a buyer's agent that sold the buyers a home, and then the buyers 5 years later want to sell their home and they become the listing agent. When that agent goes back and looks at the home, it's been entirely remodeled, and the agent never asked if they had permits. That's more.
Was our disclosures was changed or anything? On the disclosure change.
Disclosure was the representation. Oh,
Because the agent is not the seller, but the
Agent had to know.
agents until because they sold them the house 5 years ago.
Yeah, the agent had to know.
I called them and said, come look at what I did. I want to sell my house. And I redid everything.
So that would probably be negligent
Yes.
misrepresentation.
But we still have the situations in North Carolina and South Carolina where the list agent is still part of the selling or part of the seller. They own part of the property, or they are the full seller of a property that's been totally renovated, and they mark no representation. You know what you bought, you know what you're selling.
So if they're not licensed,
No, they're licensed.
if they're licensed, they have to disclose.
Right, but there's some of them are still not,
Right.
and then they're not pulling permits either. And you get in that situation, but the new form is actually not given information about that, which it should, but a lot of the structural things, material facts agents seem to be disclosing more.
If you are licensed, you do not have the option for no representation. If you know it, you have to tell.
So we also have questions regarding flipping houses. If you're flipping a house and you're not getting permits and you're representing flippers, you need to disclose permits for pulled, I would think.
Yes, so if you're representing flippers, question is, if you're representing flippers and they're not pulling permits, do you have to disclose that? And the question is yes. The way you disclose that, you can disclose unpermitted space as heated square footage, heated living area. So you can say this house has 2,500 square feet HLA and 800 of it is unpermitted. That's how you would disclose that.
So if you went in and made modifications to a home, but there were things that did not require a permit to be pulled, you do not have to disclose.
No, you don't have to disclose that.
The other question is it okay on the property disclosure, or even from a listing agent perspective, if you're listing a 1968 house, to disclose this house is 50 plus years old, it may or may not have had work done over the years that is permitted. Okay, if you have, if it's can 8 times, how do you handle that scenario?
So you're listing a house that's 50 years old, and you have no knowledge whether or not there has been work over the last 60 years. I think that it's just a conversation you have. If you don't have any knowledge and you can't find any permits and it's that old, I wouldn't think it was an issue, but I'm gonna call the real estate commission, asking that. I talked to Will Martin a lot.
Okay, we'll do a follow-up.
Okay,
I think the city on holds these records for 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
That would be another piece with septic permits as well. Typically 7 to 20 years, depending on which county.
You're right, and they disappear.
Don't. And so you get a letter and you attach it. Do agents have any further responsibility to investigate septic? I mean, I had a client one time that said, I don't give you permission to dig up my yard to figure out the septic. I bought it with this letter. Someone else should buy it with this letter. Is there any liability on the agent at that point?
So there's a question on the floor about septic tanks, selling the home with the letter because those permits disappear a lot. The real estate commission does not expect us to go digging up septic tanks. If it's an old septic tank, I think again, it's a conversation you have with the buyer that this is a septic tank. It's 50 years old. I think we should have it inspected because it's a caveat emptor state. And if we're not aware of a problem, but they pay us for our advice.
They waive that section. Have to sign off on it.
Right. Yeah. I bought a house maybe 20 years ago. It had septic. I knew it had a septic. I didn't have it inspected. Like 2 weeks after the whole thing caved in. So change in loan product is a material fact, especially if you're changing from a conventional to a VA or an FHA. Because there might be increased cost to the seller in that situation. And I'm finished right on time.
Come up here so they can hear me over here.
Okay.
So I just wanted to thank Laurie for coming in today and sharing what she has with us regarding designated dual agency and material misrepresentation, and going over the new North Carolina residential property disclosure proposed form that is still in process of being finalized with hearings. So if you had any questions about what you heard today, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or to Laurie so that we can get your questions answered. I'm sure there are a lot of questions or a lot of scenarios that are rolling in your mind right now based on things that have happened. Don't hesitate to connect and ask those questions. And we can also do a follow-up and Q&A later in the year regarding those questions.
Or any other subject you want to talk about.
And I also would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone that Laurie is not only an instructor, but she also is an NC Realtors treasurer this year. And she has put her name on the ballot to run for president-elect in the fall for NC Realtors to work with us throughout the state to do things. So if you're in a different part of the state, you will probably see her in your area. And please make sure that when the ballots come out that you consider Laurie for a vote for our next president. Just wanted to give you a heads up on that. She does education. She has been our president at Canopy, and she has been at NC Realtors board of directors and treasurer for years. So she knows a lot, has a lot of great information. And I thank her for coming in to share what she did with us today and take the time so that we are more educated. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.